Welcome to Moments with Marianne. I'm so delighted we're spending this time here today. We have a very inspiring show coming right up with special guest, Tara Lal, and she's here today to share with us her new book, Standing on My Brother's Shoulders, Making Peace with Grief and Suicide. Now, Tara is an author, firefighter, and mental health first aid instructor. She was born in London, but now lives in Sydney, Australia. She is a PhD candidate and works with various leading mental health charities to conduct research and raise awareness of suicide and mental illness. Next month, Tara is cycling 5,000 kilometers unsupported across Australia, the equivalent of cycling from England to America. She'll be doing this to raise awareness for Lifeline, which is Australia's leading service provider in suicide prevention. So let's welcome to the show, Tara Lal.
Thank you, Marianne. Lovely to be here.
You know, what an honor it is to have you here and to talk about this book. And I have to tell you, I think this book, I'm sure you have people reaching out to you saying, gosh, I wish this book or a book like this was printed like 10, 20, however many years ago, because we really need to have a discussion on this topic.
Yeah, I completely agree. And I think, slowly, very slowly, things are starting to become a bit more visible around mental health and particularly around suicide. But there's so far to go. And I think that silencing of people, of not bringing it out in conversation and not knowing how to have safe conversation around suicide in particular, it's such an important conversation to have. And that's why I think it's so important. And what my book speaks to is really exactly that. How do we create safe conversation around mental health and suicide, which allows people to share their own stories, which in itself is so helpful, I think.
Oh, without a doubt. I really felt that your book, while it opens the door for this discussion, and while there are many doors that need to be opened about this, it also offers a lot of hope. And I think a lot of times when when we talk about mental health, when we talk about suicide, sometimes that can seem like a very hopeless topic.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, it's so hard to find that balance, because I think what I realized through writing my book and obviously being a lot older now, is that, we have to acknowledge the darkness and the struggle that goes with mental health issues and suicide and grief in particular. But also, exactly as you say, there is hope, and there is, in a way, when something really catastrophic happens, there is a potential for growth from that. And that growth comes from the struggle to accept the new life that you have, really. And certainly that's what I found. And I hope that my book really does speak to that as well, and that it acknowledges, I guess, the darkness, but also the light and the possibility for growth.
Yeah. While there are many different family dynamics that happen, mental health is something I think everyone should be talking about, especially as the world is changing now. And I would love for you to share with us, just so our listeners can understand you and your background, what your childhood was like.
Yeah, I grew up in the 70s in North London. And I think when I was growing up, I just thought that my family was normal. I had an older brother and an older sister, and then my parents. And my parents had a mixed race marriage. My father was Indian, my mother English. But I really thought that we had a normal family life. I don't know how old I was when I started to realize that something was different about my father, and I didn't understand what was happening. And at some point, I must have realized that he was depressed, because I found a diary entry that I'd written maybe when I was about 8 or 9 saying, "Dad's depressed. I hate it when Dad's depressed because I always think that it's my fault." And that really spoke to me in how I'd changed as I grew up and started to think that everything was my fault. And that when he was depressed, he absolutely loved to read. He read and he read and he read, and there was books covered all around our house. But when he was depressed, he wasn't even able to read. And subsequently had a few episodes where he was in hospital for his depression, quite severe depression at that time. And then our mother was diagnosed with cancer when I was 8. And she fought that, and she fought to try and keep our family together through my father's illness as well. But she died when I was 13, and that triggered quite a severe psychotic episode in my father. He suffered a kind of mania where he was like, it was like the best thing that ever happened to him, mum dying. And obviously as a child, that I couldn't understand that, and that was so difficult because I just didn't realize what was happening, and it was really frightening. And he was then admitted to hospital very soon after my mother's death. And so after that happened, I just found, I hope that our grief, and my brother and my sister, that we'd somehow, that it would unite us, but it really didn't. We all sort of weren't able to speak about it as young adolescents. My brother was 15 and my sister was 17 at the time. And my father was in hospital, and we were going to be adopted by various families. But my aunt and uncle, who lived outside of London and had their own family, fought for us to stay together. And I don't know, again, at what point I started to realise that my brother was changing. He very much internalised his own grief, but we really protected each other. And he was a person I looked to when it didn't feel that the world was safe anymore. And I just had no emotional maturity to really cope with that level of grief, and having no parent around to sort of guide me through that. And so we became very close, me and my brother. And then when he was very, very smart and charismatic and good looking and charming, and all the girls wanted to be with him and all the boys wanted to be like him. And then he went to Oxford University, and in his first term there, he took his own life. And I was 17 at the time. And when at that point, my life really fell apart, and everything that I knew and everything that I loved had been taken from me. And that really set the scene for how my life then evolved and the ways that I tried to cope. I had started having panic attacks. And I wrote to a friend and I said, I don't want to die, but I don't know how to live. And that's exactly how it felt to me, that this world, I didn't know how to function in the world anymore, or how to take a step forward, or anywhere really. And, subsequently I really coped just by trying to keep busy and keep traveling. And I moved to Australia, and I was surrounding myself really with people that didn't know my past. So I never, ever talked about it. And there was all these subliminal messages, I guess, from society, but also within myself around shame and silencing of suicide in particular. And so that inability to talk about it, I think, really was damaging, and it was destructive, and that played itself out in my life until really my early 30s, when I really started to turn towards what had happened to me and turn towards the grief. So that was how I came to be here. And then really the last 17 years of my life have been about turning towards everything that happened and processing it, and then finding growth from what happened rather than finding destruction.
Well, I really applaud you for your courage, because it is difficult to walk through everything that you've been through and to come out the other side in the way that you have. You're a shining light for many other people who, deal with, maybe mental illness in the family, or, suicide, and just that grief in itself can be overwhelming. And it's interesting, a lot of times when we grow up with, um, family members or individuals that we know that have mental illness, that seems normal. So we don't have the life skills in how to move forward in a healthy way and cope with our emotions and our feelings.
Yeah, I agree completely. And I think that's something that, would be so helpful, and that I really try and speak to now, is how do we teach our kids to how do we talk about mental health in a really open, honest, supportive way, and teach them how to struggle in a way and how to engage in those difficult topics, so that it does, in a way, normalize that conversation around mental health. Because I think, as you say, I didn't realize for probably 30 years of my life what was really happened, that my father's illness was, the damage that caused, really. And, it causes so many knock-on effects of thinking that, that, as I said, that his illness was my fault, that I didn't have any role model as how to cope with life, really, or not a functional role model of how to cope with depression or anxiety or any of the things that my father experiences. And I certainly didn't understand, anything about mental health, and I didn't have an adult to openly talk about what was happening. And I think that would have been so helpful.
Yeah, especially back then, because most people didn't have those kind of discussions. It was just really quiet. And that's why, a book like yours, Standing on My Brother's Shoulders, is so important today, because we are opening the discussion in regards to mental health and suicide and just grief within itself, and being able to have these discussions going, you know what? I have this going on in my family. Maybe this is something I need to look at. How can I heal myself?
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, I think we didn't even realize. So, my grandmother on my father's side, she had actually suffered from paranoid schizophrenia, but I didn't know that. I wasn't told that until my 30s. And I think that says so much about the shame involved in mental health, and that it's not okay to talk about it or acknowledging it. And that I was told always that, she had died by natural causes, which she did, but die by natural causes, but her mental health issues were never spoken about. And actually, had I known about those things, it would have really helped me to understand my father's reactions and my father's illness, and, to, I guess, look after myself and care for myself in a way that was really healthy. And I think I wasn't able to do that. A lot of that was due to the silencing that I think, especially, in the 60s and 70s and 80s, and even into the 90s, around mental health issues, that it hopefully slowly is now beginning to change. And certainly through my book, I hope that works towards creating that healthy conversation.
So, why did you feel now was the right time to write this book?
It's a really great question. I think so my brother had written diaries before he died. And I had them, and I had held them with me for many, many years, always thinking I need to do something with his diaries, because they were so incredibly beautifully written for a young, 18, 19-year-old boy. And I just had them with me, but I think I wasn't, they were tucked away sort of under my bed. And then I think back in 2009, I got to a point in my life where a few things had happened. I'd had a breakdown of a relationship. I had been attended a suicide call as a firefighter at work. And a colleague of mine had attempted to take her own life. And all of those things kind of triggered in me this sense of, it's time to start writing. It's time to just go back. And I didn't really start writing with the intention of writing a book. And I think that was actually really helpful. It was more a sort of organic flow of grief, really, from the breakdown of quite a short but intense relationship. And I couldn't understand why it had such a huge impact on me. And as I started to write to really help myself process what was happening, I realized that actually I was grieving for Adam and my brother, and that grief really came, for some reason, that breakdown of that relationship triggered that grief, and all these other things that were happening to me that were kind of telling me it's time to look at your pain, Tara. And one of the ways that I was able to do that was to write. And it was only really later that writing sort of turned into a book, and then incorporating my brother's diaries in that, and it became this like dialogue or conversation between my brother and I. And so it kind of evolved into what it is now in the book, naturally, but didn't start off with like that.
Well, I have to say, your book is so beautifully written. And as I was reading it, I think it provides a lot of hope for people who are looking to get beyond their grief, or to find healing, or just be able to reconcile their feelings about it all.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's so hard. And that's what I realized, that, those childhood experiences in particular, and what I know now is that, 40% of adults who are suffering from mental ill health have had some sort of adverse childhood experience. And so I think when you're a child, your brain's developing, everything is so kind of plastic, and you're like a sponge. So it really does impact how you develop. And one of the things for me and for many other children in similar situations is that inability to really hold your emotions, or even to identify with them. And you kind of, I think one of the ways that I coped, and what I now know in terms of trauma, is to dissociate from your body and your feelings and your emotions. And it's really took me many, many years to be able to actually look into how did I feel, and to have the courage to sit with really difficult emotions. And I think that is one of the greatest strengths and acts of courage, is to be able to sit with those really dark, difficult emotions. But it's also incredibly empowering if you can find a way to do that.
I was completely surprised when, just reading your book and hearing how the brain is really different for those that, take their own lives. I had no idea.
Yeah, I mean, I had my first degree was actually in physiology, so I had a background in neurophysiology as well. And it was, later on, I think, having my own kind of lived and living experience of mental health issues in my family, I then started to go back to some of that physiology, and really understand that because your brain is so plastic, and it's particularly when you're under the age of about 24, the things that happen to you change the sensitivity of your central nervous system. And I always felt that I was kind of hypersensitive to stress and anxiety and rejection and all these things, which I was. And when I looked into the neurophysiology, it was like, that's exactly what that's saying. It really does change you, and you are kind of hypersensitized. And then it enabled me to understand why it took me so long to kind of change those patterns. But also, because your brain is so plastic, it is possible to change those really integral patterns that you may have developed during childhood. And that really gave me hope and understanding and self-compassion as to why I felt that I had to go over and over what seemed to me the same things over and over again. But that really helped me to understand that, and also to make me realize that it was possible to change that. But it took a lot of effort and time and work to kind of restructure my neural system, if you like.
Oh man, like that is just so impressive to be able to do that. And I think a lot of people hearing that go, gosh, okay, there's hope for me, because you do see these kind of cycle of patterns that happen maybe in relationships or reactions or whatever the case is. And to know that you can work on that and change those, I mean, it's got to be just like a breath of fresh air for many people.
Yeah, I think so. And I think what's difficult about our society is we're kind of taught that there's an easy fix for everything. And that, we can just do something and it will be fixed. And I always sort of wanted this great epiphany that I was just going to turn around and my life would be kind of fixed and I'd be better. I'm really glad that I finished my book in the way that I did, because when I was writing, I just wanted this happy ending. But what I realize is it's a continual process, and actually, that it does take work to be happy, but we're not really taught that. And especially if you've had difficult childhood experiences or challenging life experiences, that it does take work and effort, but it is possible. And also, in a way, because of the work and the effort and because of the struggle, that's a really enduring kind of change. It's not just a transitory kind of thing. And it doesn't mean that I don't struggle with things that come up now, but I feel completely that I have the capacity to cope with whatever life throws at me, and I will bounce back and process it in a much more healthy way without any destructive behaviors. And I totally believe that we all have the capacity to do that, but we have to realize that it takes work and it takes time. And I hope that people hearing this who might be struggling and feeling like, perhaps the road to recovery is never ending, and are they really getting anywhere, which is certainly what I felt for a long, long time, that you do have ups and downs on the road to recovery, and it's not a nice, smooth trajectory. But if you keep working and keep building all those tools and keep looking for different things to help you, and building the tools and strategies that you have available to you whilst really diving into that emotional pain, that you can recover and you can grow. And the growth really comes from that struggle. And I completely see now that the depth of my struggle and the extent of my struggle, which really went on for many, many years, is also really profoundly why I, have where I am today, is because of that struggle. It's not because I didn't experience any pain or any difficulty in getting to where I am now. I did, but that's what made it what it is.
Yeah, it's really that journey. Do you feel that most people get frustrated because they think that, as you kind of mentioned a little bit ago, that like the journey is just so long, they'll never get there?
Yeah, I do. I think absolutely. And I completely understand that. And also because, realistically speaking, if you're suffering from mental health issues, part of the definition of mental illness is that it changes your thoughts, feelings, and behaviors. So the very nature of the illness, if you are struggling with your own mental health issues, is that can make that particularly hard to have the motivation to engage in what you need to do to find support and to go through those really difficult experiences. And that's why I really think that if you can find the right support around you to help you do that, you really need that. And there's no way I could have got to where I am now without having found the right support, from psychologists and therapists, but also from friendships and people around me. I think all of those things helped, and using alternative therapies as well. I kind of looked at everything and pulled different bits from all sorts of areas at different times to kind of help me through.
I think that's so important because, everyone's different. There's no magic bullet. You have to try different, modalities to see what works with you during the, whatever it is that you're trying to process or move through, because it just seems like it's such a journey.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it is so much about, like I remember reading one of my favorite books, The Road Less Traveled by M. Scott Peck. And the first time I picked it up, I just thought, oh, this is just telling me that, if I don't have two loving parents, then there's no hope for me. And that's all I saw. And I put it away. And then 5 years later, I came back to it. And I just found it to be such an incredible book and so useful. And I think that's the same with so many of the things that we can find that might help us. It's got to be the right time for whatever that type of therapy or support is, and it's got to be with the right person. And certainly with finding a mental health professional or a psychologist or a psychotherapist, it has to be about the right person and finding that connection with them and the way that they work. And over 15 years I've had 3 different therapists, 2 psychologists and 1 psychotherapist, and they worked in very different ways, but that was really spoke to what I needed at that time in the way that they worked. And I think, at first I really just wanted the very kind of superficial, more, I guess, mainstream cognitive behavior therapy to just kind of strip back the top layers. And that's what I needed. There was no way I could have gone deeper than that. And then I looked at more trauma-focused therapy, which was incredibly helpful. And I used a technique called EMDR, which is eye movement desensitization reprocessing. And that's been shown to be really effective for trauma. And then, lastly, it did with a psychotherapist that looked very differently, but really dove very, very deeply into those unconscious things we have within us and processing really difficult emotions, which for me was anger. And I found anger incredibly difficult to make peace with. And I kind of shunned it. I didn't like anger for a long time. And actually that was unhealthy for me. So I think there's many different layers, and it's about finding the right person and the right type of treatment for you. And if that first person doesn't work, then absolutely go and look for somebody else. And I know many people who have maybe seen 4 or 5 different people before they found the right person to help support them on their own journey.
Yeah, so the key is to not give up and to keep looking for the right fit for you, is what I'm hearing.
Yes, 100%. Absolutely.
And that makes such a huge difference. Now, let's talk about the title of your book, Standing on My Brother's Shoulders. What inspired you to name your book that?
Yeah, it's a lovely question. It brings a smile to my face just to hear that, because I was struggling with the title. But it really has a dual meaning, because I talk about in my book about this game that my brother and I used to play, where one of us would stand on the other one's shoulders and we'd sort of hook on to hold by the fingertips this little piece of cornice in our living room. And then the other one would run up and down at the living room as many times and count the laps before we said, right, you have to come pick me up now. And then, my brother never, ever let me fall. So he would always, pick me up and put me back on his shoulders to keep me safe. And then I think, the other meaning behind it is just really that sense of he held me, he cradled my grief, he cradled me at a time when I was so vulnerable and so sad for the loss of our mother. And he held me up and he supported me. So there's really that dual meaning. And actually, it was my sister that came up with that title. And when she did, I just went, that's it. That's perfect. And I'm so happy with the title of the book now.
Oh my goodness, I love that. When you were doing your research for the book, was there anything that either surprised you or you just, weren't aware of?
I think a lot around my family and my father's history, because I had to try and piece bits together. And so I found out more about my grandmother's illness, which I hadn't known, and the events, for my father during his childhood with her illness. And that was through speaking to my uncle in India, one of my dad's brothers. And finding out more about that, I think, and their family history before, long before I was ever born. And my father was and his two brothers were in an orphanage in London during the war, and then he was fostered, and his mother was in a psychiatric institution. And finding out all of that, it really helped me to understand, I guess, the depth of pain that my father was in and why he had suffered and struggled throughout his life in the way that he had. And that really helped me to understand that, and it was interesting because much later on when I was having therapy myself, and I, as I said, going through the same things over and over. And I said at one point, I said, I feel like I'm healing my parents' wounds that they weren't able to heal for whatever reason. And I'm now not only healing myself, but I'm healing them. And I think that was so true. And I think we all do that. And there's a lot of research around intergenerational trauma and how we carry trauma through generations. And I very much feel that a lot of the work that I had to do was to try and heal a lot of my father's wounds and my mother's as well.
My goodness, you're just such the hero. I have to tell you that, because besides diving into this, the work that you do, you're a firefighter, you assist people as far as mental health first aid instructor. You really are putting yourself out there in this book, also in kind of a raw way where we're bringing this discussion forward. Because I think also when people talk about mental illness, and if we look up at the family tree, and go, gosh, okay, maybe my dad had this and his parents had this. I think a lot of people are afraid to even look, because they're afraid to see what they're going to find out. But there's so much positivity that comes from that and comes from that knowledge.
Yes, there really is. And I completely understand. As I said, for probably 15 years of my life, I basically turned away from all the past and everything that had happened and anything that was, had happened to my father or within my family. So I really understand why people do that. But I also think, when I look back, that's what keeps us small and contained and in a way, driven by fear. And I really feel that fear-driven behavior and the way that we live is just destructive. And actually, I only found my strength through turning towards that and turning towards those really difficult questions. And a lot of what I speak about now, particularly around suicide, because I'm now studying for a PhD looking at the impact of suicide on firefighters, and I hear their stories as well. So I keep hearing these same stories over and over again of the damage of not talking about it. And the recurring question for so many people with suicide is why? And that certainly haunted me, and it's haunted many of my firefighters that I speak to, as how do I make peace with that question why? And I think that if we supported people in answering that question and turning towards that question why, we could really reframe the conversation around suicide and around mental health. And, teach people and kids from a young age to look at what's my meaning and purpose in life. And because I think that question why kind of really morphed, and certainly for me morphed into, well, what was the meaning of my brother's life and what is the meaning of my life? And it's a very difficult thing to make peace with. And in some ways there isn't any peace to be made, except that it's the process of looking at the why. And for me, that can actually, although it's frightening, because I was so frightened, because I thought, what if I look to that question why and I find what my brother found? And I didn't understand what I now know about suicide in that, most people don't want to die. It's just they're in so much pain that is the only way that they can see at that time to end their pain. And, it helped me to actually understand a lot more about suicide. But I think collectively, and culturally and at a community level, as well as an individual level, if we could support people to turn towards that questioning why around, you know, what is the meaning of life and what's my purpose in life? And we know that that's really protective for people if they have a meaning and a purpose in life. So I think we can use that questioning to help us, and to also engage in that bigger conversation around death, which, you know, in our society, we live as if we're never going to die, and we never embrace that. And I've certainly found that actually, if you could, there's so much for us to learn by acknowledging death, and that we are all going to die, and that is the one certainty in life. So what does that, how can that actually help us to live in a more meaningful and engaged way? And, you know, I think there are other cultures where they do that so much better, and we could really learn from that. Like in Mexico, they have the National Day of the Dead, and they recognize that and all the people that they've lost. And that would be really helpful if we could do that on a societal level, to actually turn towards those questions.
Yeah, really dive into those. Well, I have to say, I mean, from reading your book and what I know about your background, it sounds like what is your background and your education has brought you to this place where you're uniquely fit to help firefighters and other people understand, why suicide is happening and why they would contemplate that and how to move beyond these kind of questions and find that deeper purpose in their life, or maybe that healing that needs to take place. I really feel you're uniquely qualified to do that.
Thank you. I feel that. I do very strongly feel that, through the process that I've gone to, a lot of it was about, finding my own truth, really, and having that gentle sense of knowing, which I felt when I was writing the book. I didn't know where it was taking me, but I just knew that it was going somewhere. And really, everything would have said that I should never have written it, in that I'd never written anything before, and I didn't know how to write, and I didn't really read books and all of that. But I just knew. And I think that a lot of that is having that deep reflection and work on myself to get to that point where I feel like I am in tune with myself, if you like, and I can live my truth. And I very much feel that this is the path that I should be on, and I can bring something because I can bring, I guess, the lived experience. I can speak through my brother's diaries that he left. Because I guess I have the academic background from a physical perspective in terms of, physiotherapy and physiology, and now in my PhD in mental health, and obviously as a firefighter, really living and breathing that as a uniform first responder, which comes with its own set of differences and challenges, particularly with suicide, when you're always the rescuer and you're never the person to be rescued. And certainly what I see with my firefighters is that's incredibly challenging for them.
Yeah, I can only imagine. Well, thank you for not only writing this book, but having the courage to do all the things that you do, and for being that first responder that we all need in many different capacities. I understand you also have a cycling trip coming up, and I'd love to hear more about that.
Yes, so I do. It's very exciting, although we are waiting for the state borders to open so we can start. But we're planning to cycle, myself and a friend of mine, unsupported, across Australia from the westernmost point to the easternmost point, which is about 5,000 kilometres, so the equivalent of cycling from the UK to America. And we'll be carrying all our food with us, and all supplies that we need. But I am hoping to raise money for Lifeline, and the message that we are trying to portray through our ride, and through having conversations, especially through regional Australia, where suicide rates are twice what they are in metropolitan areas, to raise awareness that around that struggle, and that how do we teach people to struggle well. And that's really the message for our ride, is how do we embrace life's challenges to teach us how to struggle in a way that creates growth from life's most difficult challenges, which is obviously what my book speaks to as well.
So, where can our listeners go to learn more about your book, learn about this trip that you're doing, and how they can support you, how they can donate, and be part of your community?
Well, we have, so I have my own website, which is tarajlal.com. And that has information on a little bit of information on the ride about my research and my book and my story and some of the articles I've written around health and well-being and mental illness and suicide. And then we also have a website, cyclingoz.com. OZ, which is about the ride and what we're doing, and there is a donation platform up on that. So that the donation platform will be up in the next couple of days, and we hope to start that ride on the 1st of November. Although, fingers crossed, we're waiting for the Western Australian and South Australian borders to open so that we can actually do that. But we will be doing it at some point. And what we've realised is that, in this world of uncertainty at the moment, in a way, that's part of it, not knowing now and how we all are living. And so how can we use that uncertainty as well in a way that's growthful? And so, whilst I'd love to say we're going to start then, we know that we can't, but we will be doing it. And if we don't start on the 1st of November, we will be starting at some point when the borders open.
Well, it's all about safety first, and we support you 100%. Tara, thank you so much for taking the time to be on the show with us here today.
Thank you, Marianne. It's been an absolute pleasure.
Well, thank you, Tara. It has been such an honor to spend this time with you and to talk about your new book, Standing on My Brother's Shoulders, Making Peace with Grief and Suicide. Again, if you'd like to connect with Tara, you can at tarajlal.com for more information. Her book, Standing on My Brother's Shoulder, is available at Amazon, Barnes & Noble, and all indie retailers. And if you don't see it on the shelf, ask for them to order it. And of course, it's available on Kindle. Well, we're at the end of our time today. I would like to thank everyone for tuning in. You're listening to Moments with Marianne. And remember, make every moment count.
In a single moment, your life can change. Moments with Marianne is a transformative hour that covers an endless array of topics with the best of the best. Her guests are leaders in their fields, ranging from inspirational authors, top industry leaders, and business and spiritual entrepreneurs. Each guest is gifted and a true visionary, a recognized leader in her own work, and while teaching others to develop, refocus, and grow, Marianne will bring the best guest and sometimes a special surprise. Don't miss this. You never know just which moment will change your life forever. Moments with Marianne airs every Sunday, Monday, Thursday, and Friday at 8 p.m. Eastern and 5 p.m. Pacific Time. Make sure to tune in and visit momentswithmarianne.com for more information.